Before there was Rome, before Greece, before Egypt raised its pyramids to the sky, and there was something else. Something older. Something so fundamental to human civilization that without it, you would not be watching this right now. 5,000 years ago, in a land between two rivers, a group of people did something no one had ever done before. They looked at the chaos of the world and decided to write it down. They invented the wheel. They invented mathematics. They invented law. They invented the very concept of time as we still measure it today. And then they vanished. Welcome to Mythic Origins. Today, we travel to ancient Mesopotamia, the land we now call Iraq and parts of Syria and Turkey, to uncover the story of the civilization that quietly gave birth to almost everything we take for granted. This is not just a history lesson. This is the story of human ambition at its rawest, of cities built from mud and ambition, of kings who called themselves gods, of myths carved into clay that still echo in our religions, our stories, and our fears today, and buried beneath it all, a darkness most historians rarely talk about. The name Mesopotamia comes from ancient Greek, and it means the land between the rivers. Those rivers were the Tigris and the Euphrates, and roughly 6,000 years ago, something extraordinary began happening along their banks. The soil here was impossibly fertile. Every year the rivers flooded and retreated, leaving behind rich black earth that could sustain massive crops. People didn't just survive here, they thrived. And when you have more food than you need, you have something civilization requires above all else: time. Time to think, time to build, time to ask what comes next. Around 3500 BCE, a people known as the Sumerians built the world's first true cities: Uruk, Nippur, Eridu, Ur. These weren't just settlements. They were organized urban centers with temples, marketplaces, water systems, and something that would change everything: a ruling class. Uruk, at its peak, may have been home to over 50,000 people. It was, by every meaningful measure, the first city in human history. And it was just the beginning. Around 3200 BCE, the Sumerians did something no human civilization had ever done before. They began writing, not drawing pictures on cave walls, not simple tally marks. They created a full system of written language called cuneiform, wedge-shaped symbols pressed into wet clay tablets. It began as a way to track trade: grain in, grain out, cattle counted, debt recorded. But within centuries, it became something far more powerful. Sumerians were writing laws, writing poetry, writing creation myths that described how the world began, how humans were made, and why gods allowed suffering to exist. One of those texts is so old and so familiar, it should disturb you: the Epic of Gilgamesh. Written over 4,000 years ago, it tells the story of a king who loses his closest companion and, consumed by grief, goes searching for eternal life. Along the way, he encounters a great flood, a flood so similar to the biblical story of Noah that scholars have debated the connection for over a century. Was the biblical flood account borrowed from Mesopotamian legend? That remains officially an open question, but the similarities are not subtle. They are striking. Let's pause on something remarkable. Nearly every foundational system modern civilization runs on was either invented or first formalized in ancient Mesopotamia. The wheel, first used here around 3500 BCE, initially not for transportation, but for pottery. The plow, irrigation canals. The sail. Mathematics with a base 60 counting system that we still use today when we measure time: 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour. The Sumerians also divided the night sky into constellations and tracked the movements of planets with startling precision. The Babylonians, who came after the Sumerians and absorbed much of their knowledge, could predict lunar eclipses centuries into the future. And then there was the law. Around 1754 BCE, the Babylonian king Hammurabi produced one of the earliest written legal codes in history. 282 laws: crime and punishment, property rights, workers' wages, even consumer protection. The Code of Hammurabi didn't just organize a society, it declared for the first time that a king's power came with a responsibility to justice. That idea is still the foundation of every democracy on earth. But here is the part of ancient Mesopotamia that history books tend to soften. The first civilization was not born in freedom. It was built on hierarchy, coercion, and something that would plague humanity for thousands of years: institutionalized slavery. The great temples of Sumer, called ziggurats, were not just places of worship. They were economic engines. Priests controlled vast stores of grain. Scribes recorded who owed what. Ordinary people worked temple lands under conditions that scholars describe as debt servitude. If your harvest failed, you owed the temple. If you couldn't pay, you worked. And the kings of Mesopotamia were not merely rulers. They were presented as divine intermediaries between the gods and humanity. To challenge the king was to challenge the gods themselves. Dissent was not tolerated. Archaeologists excavating the royal tombs of Ur, dating back to around 2600 BCE, discovered something deeply unsettling. When a Sumerian king or queen died, they were not buried alone. Attendants, soldiers, and servants were interred alongside them. Dozens of them, all found in orderly positions, with no signs of struggle. The theory most scholars accept today is that these people consumed poison willingly, or were compelled to, as part of a ritual to accompany their ruler into the afterlife. Whether that choice was truly voluntary is something we cannot know, but the scale is undeniable. The civilization that invented justice did not always practice it. To understand ancient Mesopotamia, you have to understand its religion. Because it wasn't like most religions we know today. The gods of Mesopotamia were not loving. They were not merciful by default. They were powerful, unpredictable, and often indifferent to human suffering. The Sumerians believed humans were created specifically to serve the gods, to do the labor the gods found tedious. Among the most feared was Ereshkigal, queen of the underworld, a realm the Sumerians called Kur, or the Great Below. It was described as a place of dust and darkness, where the dead wandered without joy, consuming clay and drinking dirty water. There was also the myth of Inanna, goddess of love and war, who descended into the underworld and was killed, only to be resurrected after 3 days. Scholars have noted this resurrection motif appears thousands of years before similar stories in other religious traditions. Whether those connections are coincidence, influence, or parallel human storytelling is still debated. But what is not debated is this: the Mesopotamians lived in genuine fear of forces beyond their control. And they spent enormous energy in temples, in rituals, in prayers pressed into clay, trying to manage that fear. So how does a civilization this powerful, this creative, this foundational, and the truth is it didn't end all at once, Mesopotamian civilization rose and fell through multiple empires over thousands of years. The Sumerians, the Akkadians, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, and finally, the Neo-Babylonian Empire. Each conquered the last, absorbed its knowledge, and built higher, but each also fell. And the reasons are familiar: drought, famine, internal conflict, and relentless invasion from outside. Around 539 BCE, the Persian Empire under Cyrus the Great conquered Babylon. The last independent Mesopotamian kingdom was gone. The cities were abandoned, the clay tablets buried under centuries of sand, the cuneiform script forgotten so completely that when European explorers first encountered the ruins in the 18th and 19th centuries, they had no idea what they were looking at. It took scholars decades to decipher the ancient script, and what they found when they did rewrote human history. The most advanced civilization the ancient world had ever seen had been lying, silent beneath the desert, waiting to be remembered.
Ancient.
Here is what I want to leave you with right now. As you watch this, there are hundreds of thousands of cuneiform tablets still untranslated, sitting in museum basements, in storage boxes, in the ground in Iraq, where conflict has made archaeological work nearly impossible for decades. We don't know what's on them. We don't know what secrets those people committed to clay 5,000 years ago, trusting that someone eventually would read them. Maybe nothing world-shattering. Maybe myths we already know in a slightly different form, or maybe something that changes everything we think we know about where we came from. The first civilization left us a message. We just haven't finished reading it yet. If you want more stories from humanity's humankind's forgotten past, the civilizations, the myths, the mysteries that history tried to bury, subscribe to Mythic Origins. We're just getting started.